The silk of the dress felt like a lie against my skin. It was a deep, impossible red, the color of a fresh wound, and it clung to every curve as I moved through the suffocatingly cheerful ballroom. My sister, Sarah, had called it a showstopper. She'd said it with a bright, brittle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She knew what she was doing, putting me in a color that screamed for attention at the wedding where she was marrying my ex-boyfriend, my daughter's father. Every clink of champagne flutes, every burst of forced laughter, was a tiny shard of glass under my skin. I held my smile in place, a mask of polite congratulations I'd been practicing for months. I was 20 years old. I felt 1,000. People's eyes slid over me, full of pity or a morbid curiosity I refused to acknowledge. There she is, Chloe, the first one, the one he left with a baby. My daughter, Ava, was blessedly absent, safe with a sitter who was earning triple her usual rate tonight. The thought of her wide, trusting eyes and the gap in her smile where a tooth used to be, was the only thing keeping me upright. I was doing this for Sarah, for my mother, for the fragile illusion of a family that hadn't been shattered the day Marcus told me he was in love with my sister. He was standing by the towering white cake now, his arm possessively around Sarah's waist. He looked good in his tuxedo, the way a predator always looks good in its natural environment. He caught my eye across the room, and his smile widened. It was a conqueror's smile. He'd won. He'd taken everything, and now he was celebrating the victory. I needed air. Turning on a heel that felt perilously high, I navigated the maze of tables, murmuring excuses as I slipped past smiling strangers. The hallway outside the ballroom was blissfully cool and quiet. I leaned against the flocked wallpaper, the pattern pressing into my bare back, and finally let my breath out. My phone felt heavy in my clutch. A lifeline. That's when he appeared, materializing from the shadows of the corridor as if summoned by my despair. Marcus. There you are, he said, his voice a low purr that used to make me melt. Now it just made me cold. Hiding. Just getting some air, Marcus. Congratulations, I kept my voice even, professional. The same tone I used at the high-end lounge where I worked, serving men who thought their money bought them the right to my time. He took a step closer, crowding me against the wall. The scent of his cologne, the one I'd bought him for his birthday 3 years ago, was an assault. You look incredible, Chloe. That dress, his eyes roamed over me, a slow, proprietary crawl that made my skin prickle. Red was always your color. Sarah picked it out. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I stared at a point just over his shoulder.
Right.
Sarah, he chuckled, a humorless sound. Look, I know this is awkward. It's your wedding day, Marcus. You should be with your wife. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Things are different now, Chloe. I'm with new people. Important people. The kind of people who can make problems disappear. His hand came up, brushing a stray curl from my temple. I flinched. I could still take care of you. You and Ava. You just have to be smart. A chill, entirely separate from the hallway's air conditioning, traced its way down my spine. This wasn't the same arrogant boy I'd loved. There was something else in his eyes, a hard, dangerous glimmer I'd never seen before. This wasn't just about him and Sarah. This was a threat, a warning. I can take care of myself, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I pushed past him, my shoulder brushing his chest. I didn't look back. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. His words echoed in my head. New people. Important people. It wasn't just a boast. It was a promise of something dark clinging to the edges of our lives. I found an empty alcove near the service entrance, hidden behind a potted palm. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, past my mom, past the sitter, past the few friends I still had time for. My thumb hovered over a name I had entered months ago, a name I never, ever intended to use.
Quan. Just the one name.
No title, no company. He'd given me his private number on a heavy, black card after I'd spent an entire evening fending off a handsy investor at his table in the lounge. I'd handled it with a cool professionalism that had apparently impressed him. He'd been sitting alone, watching, a figure of absolute stillness in a room full of noise. He'd said nothing, but his eyes, dark and intelligent, had missed nothing. When he left, he'd placed the card on the table. "For trouble you cannot handle yourself," he'd said, his voice a low, quiet rumble. I thought he was offering me a job, or perhaps something less savory. I'd pocketed the card as a curiosity, a souvenir from the world of the obscenely wealthy I only served. I never imagined I would use it. But Marcus's veiled threat, the cold certainty in his eyes, this was trouble I didn't understand. This felt like the kind of trouble that didn't just ruin your night, it ruined your life. My thumb pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. It rang twice. I expected a voicemail, an assistant. Yes, the voice was exactly as I remembered. Quiet, calm, devoid of inflection. It held an unnatural stillness that commanded attention. My own voice was a reedy whisper. "It's Chloe." From the Elysian Lounge, there was a pause. Not a pause of confusion, but of consideration. I could picture him perfectly, sitting in a dark leather chair, wearing one of his impeccably tailored suits, the fabric a shade of charcoal so dark it was almost black. I remembered the way the light caught the silver of his watch, the only piece of adornment on him. "I remember you," he said.
It was a simple statement of fact.
Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and sharp. I squeezed them shut. You said if I had trouble." Another silence. I could hear the faint, distant sound of traffic on his end of the line.
He was in a car.
"Where are you?" he asked. I gave him the name of the hotel. My voice broke on the last word. Humiliation washed over me. I was 20 years old, a mother, and I was calling a man I barely knew, a man who radiated a quiet danger that was both terrifying and magnetic, to rescue me from my sister's wedding. "I'm calling a car for my daughter. Can you just get me? Please." The line was silent for a long moment. I thought he was going to hang up to dismiss me as some hysterical girl. "Stay where you are," he said. The finality in his tone was absolute. He didn't say he'd be there soon. He didn't offer comforting words. He stated a fact. And then he hung up. I slid down the wall, my red silk dress pooling around me on the floor. I hugged my knees to my chest and waited. I didn't know who Quan was, not really. I knew he commanded a quiet, intense respect from everyone who approached his table. I knew his suits were probably worth more than my car. And I knew that when he looked at you, you felt seen. Not just your face, but everything you were trying to hide. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A single text message. Front entrance. Black sedan. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. I took one last look back toward the ballroom, at the life I was supposed to be a part of, at the happy couple celebrating on the ruins of my own young heart. Then I walked away. The night air was cool on my flushed skin. A sleek, black sedan, so polished it looked like a piece of the night sky, was idling at the curb. It was utterly devoid of markings, its windows tinted to an impenetrable black. The valet and the doorman gave it a wide berth, their gazes averted as if the car itself demanded a particular kind of respect. The back door opened from the inside. I bent down and slid onto the cool leather seat. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing us in a world of silence and the faint, clean scent of cedarwood and smoke. He was there, in the opposite corner of the spacious seat. Quan Jinwoo. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the hotel entrance, his profile sharp and severe in the intermittent glow of the streetlights. He wore a dark gray suit, the kind that was clearly custom-made, fitting his broad shoulders perfectly. His black hair was cut short, precise. There was a faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the only mar on an otherwise flawless, sternly handsome face. "Get in, Chloe," he said, his voice low. The way he said my name was different. It wasn't the casual, familiar sound Marcus made. Quan said it with a strange deliberation, as if the name itself had weight. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding into traffic with an unnerving smoothness. We drove in silence for several blocks. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of color. I should have been terrified, sitting in a stranger's car, a man who exuded an aura of contained power that was more intimidating than any overt threat. But all I felt was a profound, bone-deep sense of relief. For the first time all night, I could breathe. "Thank you," I finally managed to say, my voice small in the quiet car. He turned his head to look at me then. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they held an unnerving intelligence. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a polite dismissal of my thanks. He simply watched me. "Your ex-boyfriend," he said, his voice a flat, even tone. "Marcus Vance, it wasn't a question. He is now an associate of the Jang family." I stared at him confused. I don't know who that is." "They are my competition," he said, as if that explained everything. "And they are neither careful nor clean in their business. Your presence at that wedding tonight, your history with him, makes you a liability, a loose end." The car turned, but it wasn't in the direction of my small apartment. It was heading downtown, toward the gleaming towers of steel and glass that scraped the sky. "Where are we going?" I asked, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. "My daughter." "Your daughter is being picked up as we speak," he said, his gaze unwavering. "She will be brought to you. You are both coming with me." The calm relief I had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a sharp, cold fear. This wasn't a rescue. This was an abduction. "Coming with you where?" "I can't just leave. I have a job, an apartment." "You have a target on your back," he corrected me, his voice dangerously soft. "Marcus Vance made you a part of his world tonight, whether you wanted to be or not. And my world is the only place you will be safe from it." The penthouse was less a home and more a fortress in the sky. It occupied the entire top floor of a sleek, anonymous skyscraper. The elevator opened directly into a vast living space walled with floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a breathtaking panorama of the city's glittering sprawl. The furniture was minimalist and severe: black leather, chrome, dark wood. There were no photographs, no clutter, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was as sterile and controlled as the man who led me into it. I stood awkwardly in the center of the room, the red of my dress a garish splash of color in the monochrome landscape. He shrugged off his suit jacket, tossing it over the back of a chair. The movement was fluid, economical. Underneath, he wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing taut, corded muscle and the intricate edges of dark ink coiling around his right wrist. "There are clothes in the second bedroom," he said, gesturing down a long hallway. "Anything you need, ask the woman who brings your daughter. Her name is Mrs. Kim." He walked over to a wet bar, pouring amber liquid into 2 glasses. He didn't ask if I wanted one. He simply set a glass down on the marble countertop near me. "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." He took a slow sip of his drink, his dark eyes watching me over the rim of the glass. "I know that you are the mother of a 7-year-old girl. I know that you work 12-hour shifts to afford a small apartment in a bad neighborhood. And I know that you handled a man twice your size who represented a $50 million account for my organization with more grace and composure than any of my trained security." He paused. "I make it my business to know things. And I do not tolerate loose ends, especially when they are connected to my enemies." His words should have terrified me, but there was a strange, dispassionate logic to them that was almost calming. He wasn't acting on emotion. This was a tactical decision. I was a problem on his chessboard, and this was how he was controlling the piece. An hour later, Mrs. Kim arrived. She was an older woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel, and she held Ava's hand. My daughter was in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant, her eyes wide with a mixture of sleepiness and awe at the glittering view. Seeing her, safe and unharmed, was like taking my first full breath in hours. I rushed forward, sweeping her into my arms, burying my face in her hair. She smelled of toothpaste and sleep. "Mommy, who is that man?" she whispered, pointing a small finger at Kwan, who stood silently by the windows, observing the scene. "That's a friend, sweetie," I said, the life feeling clumsy on my tongue. Kwan's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes as he looked at Ava. It wasn't warmth.
It was something more complex.
A kind of guarded assessment. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. We were gilded prisoners. Mrs. Kim brought us food, clothes, toys for Ava. I had no phone, no access to the outside world. My life had been scooped up and deposited into this sterile, silent sky prison. Quan was a fleeting presence. He would be gone when we woke up and would often return late at night, long after Ava was asleep. On the third night, I couldn't sleep. I found him in the living room, standing before the vast window, a silhouette against the city lights. He was holding his phone, but he wasn't talking. He was just looking at the screen. I cleared my throat softly. Can't sleep either? He didn't startle. I had the sense that it was impossible to startle this man. He simply lowered the phone and turned to me.
No.
I want to thank you, I said, walking closer. For Ava. For keeping her safe. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. My eyes drifted to his phone, which he hadn't locked. The screen showed a photograph of a woman with long, dark hair and a bright, laughing smile. She was beautiful. His thumb moved, and the screen went black. But not before I saw the raw, unguarded pain that flashed across his face. It was there for only a second, a crack in the marble facade, but it was the most human expression I had ever seen on him. She trusted me, he said, his voice a low rasp, thick with a grief so old it had become a part of him. It wasn't enough to keep her safe from my world. He looked at me then, his gaze intense, heavy with unspoken history. I do not make the same mistake twice, Chloe. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about tactics or loose ends. It was a penance. Protecting me and Ava was his way of atoning for a failure he could never undo. He was protecting us from the same world that had swallowed her whole. The next day, he presented me with an option. A plane ticket, a new identity, a bank account with enough money to start over anywhere in the world. The Jangs are actively looking for you, he said, his tone flat, all business. They believe Marcus told you something. This is your chance to disappear, to be free of this. I looked at the passport in his hand, at the unfamiliar name under a picture of my face. Freedom. It was everything I should have wanted. But I thought of Marcus's cold eyes, of the threat that was not just from him, but from the entire world he'd stumbled into. Running meant looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, wondering if Ava and I were truly safe. I looked up at Quan, at the unyielding certainty in his posture. He was a cage, yes, but he was the strongest cage I had ever seen. The danger was outside his walls, not within them. No, I said, my voice clear and steady. We're safer here, with you. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. He had offered me an escape, and I had chosen to stay. For the first time, I had made a deliberate choice to be in his world. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, maybe even a reluctant respect. He slid the passport back into its envelope. The decision had been made. Later that week, the danger became real. He came home with a deep gash on his forearm, his white shirt stained with a slash of crimson. He walked into the penthouse as if nothing was wrong, but I saw the tight line of his mouth, the way he favored his other arm. Let me see that, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I'd had enough scrapes and cuts with a rambunctious 7-year-old to know my way around a first aid kit. He hesitated, then relented, sinking onto one of the low leather sofas. I retrieved the kit Mrs. Kim kept stocked in the bathroom and knelt before him. As I carefully cleaned the wound, my fingers brushed against his skin.
It was warm, alive. The proximity was dizzying.
I was acutely aware of the hard muscle under my touch, of the faint scent of cedar and ozone that clung to him. The silence in the room was a living thing, charged and heavy. I looked up to find him watching me, his gaze fixed on my face. His eyes held an intensity that made the air feel thin. It wasn't a look of gratitude or pain. It was something else, something I couldn't name. It was the look of a man who hadn't allowed himself to be touched, to be cared for, in a very long time. He didn't pull away. He simply let me tend to him, his stillness a silent confession of a need he would never admit aloud. My world had shrunk to the space of that penthouse, but within its walls, a new and dangerous tension was beginning to grow. It was no longer just about safety. It was about the man who provided it and the unsettling realization that I was starting to see the human being behind the monster.